All right. Should be good.
I have this lamp I'm going to bring over here on my desk, but I haven't done it yet, so I can have considerably better lighting.
Yeah, I struggle when I'm doing the nighttime stuff trying to get the right amount of light, but it's a never-ending battle on the workbench for sure. So, all right, let me make sure that we can see everything on YouTube because I don't, just to double check that the live went through. We're good.
Yep. Yeah, we're up.
Fantastic. We should have a couple people sitting in with us already. I saw 3 or 4 or 5 that were waiting, so we'll go ahead and get rolling. No need to wait too long. So welcome again, everybody. Let us know real quick before we get rolling too far if the audio is better this time for both Kevin and myself. We know we had a few hurdles last time, but we worked through some things, and we're pretty sure we got it set. So just give us a thumbs up. Let us know if things are good as we get rolling through here. Kevin, good to see you again.
Good to see you.
After our debacle on Sunday of somewhat organized chaos, I'm excited to get rolling into tonight's stream and chat a little bit about the steel mill stuff you were talking about, and a little bit about the direct fired heaters for the refinery tonight. So, one of the things I wanted to kick things off with us is talking about what we do, particularly when it comes to modeling in 3D and how we might start the process. From your perspective, what's the first thing you do from a research perspective once you've identified, hey, I'm going to 3D model this? How do you track down that content? It's a struggle for me, so I'm curious how you go about that on the steel mill side, because I think you guys have a lot more resources than we do on the refinery side. So how do you do that?
All right, so you're talking about after I've selected something to actually model and then produce, yeah. So I look in 2 places primarily. Google Patents. Sorry, memory lapse.
Okay.
I look in Google Patents, and I usually will try to find a patent issue date that is close to the time period of the thing that I'm trying to model. And I also will go to mostly just for how it was used or how it was plumbed into a plant or something like that. I'll go to the HAIR website, the Library of Congress HAIR website.
Okay, yeah.
I like to go to the Google Patents website because on Google Patents you're going to get an actual patent drawing, and they don't always have dimensions on them. Sometimes they do, but if they don't have dimensions and typically the stuff that I'm doing will have pipes associated with it, and if I know the pipe diameter, I can scale the drawing off of that into HO scale.
Okay. And do you find a lot of information then on the Google Patent site, or do you still find that you're digging randomly through the internet trying to find, the detail side of some of those parts? And I guess I'm thinking of in terms like a blast furnace, for example. You guys have a lot of great resources, but then when it gets into like the small details of how everything goes together, the bustle pipe and is it tweers? Is that the right?
Yeah, it's tweers. Yep, tweers.
Are there Google patent drawings for those specific pieces as well?
Not for a bustle pipe so much, but a tweers there could be, or an explosion door or something like that. There's a couple of really good books. One is on Sparrow's Point. That has for the blast furnace columns. The one behind me, the red one behind me, is from one of those prints.
Okay.
Because on the print, it's an erecting diagram. So erecting diagrams are generally the assembled or part of the assembled machine or plant or whatever, showing how the thing will be erected as how do I say that? How it will look erected,
Okay.
and give heights so that the construction crews know, okay, so this needs to be, this tall at this point or something like that. And that book has some great erecting diagrams on the blast furnaces that are at Sparrows Point, and it also has some cast house floors, which I'm also producing.
Okay.
I haven't released them to the public yet, but I'm going to produce those. But it also depends, like the U.S. Steel making, heating, and treating of steel books. They have diagrams in them, but it also depends on what year of that book that you're getting. They came out about that I've noticed, about every 5 to 7 years or so. I don't know currently if they even still make them, but so some of the earlier ones actually had like illustrations. I have one from, I think it's 1950, that actually shows all of the pipes. It's illustrated with all the pipes for the coke works, the byproduct coke plants. So you know what each pipe does and where they all go, and there's a lot. And you have to get a magnifying glass out because the stuff is so small. Other ones have just a block diagram, so they're not very much help there. But I think Google Patents and the Hair website are number one. You really kind of have to be savvy too about looking for books, and that might help on your side of the fence and the refinery modelers. There were a lot of books on steel making and the different types of plants, and they oftentimes had blueprints in them. The gas works, the coke gas works, or I shouldn't say that, coal gas works that I do. The gas producers were actually in a book that was on coal. I'd have to look up the book now. I can't. The title of it eludes me, but it was available online because it's public domain now. It's been out of print for so long.
Okay. Yeah, that's one of the things that I've been struggling with is finding good resources for the refinery really progression from early days to modern. I'm not seeing a lot. There's a lot of books out there. I don't see hardly any that are really good at describing, like you're saying, the what the pipes do and locations, because on the refinery side it just seems like every single refinery was done a little bit different depending on who worked there and how things were fabricated. But the only things I found are, I think Calmback has one book. Maybe it was one of those industrial sidings books. There's 2 or 3 versions of that out, but it's just like a small siding depot. It's not really a refinery. So right. I'm having to jump in and search through engineering documents and YouTube videos for oil refinery processes, just to even get diagrams that are somewhat helpful in that regard, and then just scour the internet for images. I hadn't thought about looking at Google Patents. I did just run across one yesterday, day before, on direct fired heaters from like 1960. So it was a good diagram to have because it's confirming a lot of the things that are still applicable today. But when you find one that you're going to jump in and you're going to go ahead and 3D model it, how do you approach it from, I'm going to develop a single model, or are you kind of a kit of parts kind of guy when you start looking at developing the model, whether it's a small model or a big model, and how do you make that determination?
It all depends on the size of the thing that I'm doing, right? And
Okay.
where it was used, because a lot of the stuff that we use, gate valves and things like that, if you look at enough of the photographs, I think there are only so many, even over the years, and a lot of them start looking a lot the same. I think I have 4 different gate valves. But some of those are ground controlled gate valves, meaning that you can they must have those in the too, I would guess. They
Yeah.
they either have a chain fall on them, or they have like a capstand looking thing on the ground with a hand wheel on it, and it's got a
Right.
cable that goes up to the gate valve. So from a kit standpoint, until I started making some of the larger things, which I actually try to avoid some of the larger items like the electrostatic precipitator that I'm doing
Yeah.
currently, like just a few minutes ago. Um, I almost kind of try to avoid those because the kits get kind of spendy, and I try to keep things low. And of course, like I said last time, I don't want to stop people from scratch building or modeling. I just want to encourage them along with things that might
Right.
be laborious to make. I mean, I chose to do the electrostatic precipitator because it it just was one of those things that if you look at the Walters model and then you got to do all the work to modify it, it wasn't that big of a model to to draw up, and the final product is pretty nice. And if a guy is, Walters discontinued, I don't know how they are with the refinery kit just to get guys going, but the steel mill, the blast furnace stuff is discontinued again, and I almost
Yeah.
kind of feel like this might be the last run. So in the future, if a guy wants to build a blast furnace, they're going to have this kind of stuff, and then you really are scratch building the whole thing. Or maybe somebody would want to get, my kit or a series of stuff from me, and they could build the rest of it themselves. I mean, I suppose that might be what my end goal is with the blast furnaces. Once I have furnace E done and can sell it, and a cast house floor, um, and the precipitator and the gas washer and all the stoves, I mean, a guy could build the rest of it himself. He's just got to have
Right.
some H columns, and I do plan on doing roof trusses. So, but the problem with that kind of stuff is it gets pretty expensive if you
Yep.
start buying all that. I mean, if you're gonna have one blast furnace, I guess in today's prices, it's not too bad. But the refinery stuff, I would think you could do some of the larger pieces because I'm not an authority on that stuff, but the ones I've looked at going, down through Joliet here, there's a ton of refineries.
Yeah.
And the large things in the plant, there don't seem to be that many large things.
Yeah.
It
They're
seems to
tall
be like,
columns.
yeah, masses of pipes
Yep.
and um, some of the other devices, I don't know what they are, but a lot of the stuff is tall columns. So you could do just the top and the bottom, or the top and the platforms or something like that. And the rest could be made out of PVC. So that having a kit would probably make more sense or be more cost effective for you than maybe on my end. I don't know.
Well, yeah, we just don't have a lot of kits other than I think it's the Northland Refinery is the one that Walters does. I honestly haven't checked if it's current or if it's discontinued. I know you can get them on eBay, but that's the only one. And it's such a generic heater and distillation column and a couple of tanks that, I mean, everybody that does a refinery that's, I guess, not really into it, they all have the same looking refinery. And so that's when I started looking at, well, I don't want the same thing as everybody else, which is similar to the path I'm sure you chose in doing custom work, is that I can design these and print them. I'm going to do something that people don't have. Mm-hmm. So I started with a distillation column, and it's basically a modular stacked set of columns that, I think they're 14, 15 millimeters tall for each section. And I've got it so that you can basically build the height of the distillation column you want, whether you're doing a small refinery or a huge, large refinery that requires multiple sections, depending on, what processes you're kicking out with the heating process and separation. But my shortest one's like 42 feet. But with it being modular, it's real simple because I can just stack the pieces on top of each other, and people have that flexibility.
I'm not sure you're still there.
Did you lose me?
A little bit.
Did you lose me? Are you good? Uh-oh.
Yeah, I've got you back now.
Okay. So the modular component there allows a modeler the flexibility to really work with whatever they want to do, and that's an approach on the refinery side that I've been fortunate to be able to push. Now the direct fired heaters are a little bit different, and that's where I was going with what's the research piece that you do, because I had to dig in and look for the different kinds of heaters, because there's basically the circular kind, there's the rectangular kind, there's vertical, there's horizontal, and it's a mix and match depending on, again, the refinery that you go to. And so when I started developing the coker tower with the coke drums for the pet coke, every resource that I have shows kind of a vertical rectangular direct fired heater, and they're massive. And so one of the things I said is, well, I don't want to build these big, huge models, because like you, I don't want to eliminate the scratch building component that the modeler can get into with styrene and do things much more economically. But I can take care of some of those detail pieces that would be a little bit more labor intensive to produce, tapered, sections and, those types of items. That's the direction I'm going with the coke tower direct fired heater. So that one's a ways down the road though, because I got to get I just finished up all the modeling for the coke tower and the base and everything for that one. But the current direct fired heater that I have that will run to the distillation column, that's the one that I have the base that's done, and it's 4 or 5 sections that are intended to go together a specific way. But then from the base of that piece, which is the radiant section, basically the lower half of those pieces, you can cap it with styrene and then build your breech box and flue up from there from scratch, or you can buy the custom pieces that I have available for that too. But those are all different. So like we could do PVC tubing for a hot blast stove, but then the caps on all those stoves are really kind of dependent on the steel mill, because they were all a little bit varied in how they were done. As I noticed, from different mill to mill. But the refineries, it's pretty cut and dry, with the exception of once you get past the radiant section. Then those are a modeler's choice: buy it or scratch build it.
Right.
So I just wanted to avoid the pure round PVC look for the bottoms of those, and then I just started working on the strakes. I forget the name of the strakes, the helical strikes that are at the top of the flues. I don't see them very much in steel mill modeling, but in refineries they have them everywhere on a lot of those flues to help with to push the flue gas up. And so I've just developed a whole series of those to fit in standard PVC. So you can run your flue stacks and then put 1, 2, 3 of these helical strikes on it, which is a nice little detail for the top of the flues.
Yeah, you don't see that.
Yeah, and so the last piece I have is, how do I get that top lip of the flue to be as thin as possible, so that it doesn't like this thick piece of printed resin when you're done with it, that's out of scale when you get to the top. And so I don't have the resources, is what I'm finding, is readily available. I do have to hunt and dig really to find as much as I can. But I'm like you, once I can get in and see stair, safety ladders and pipe sizes and get an idea of the scale of those, it's fairly easy to get a good reading on the scale of the overall model. And then we compress it, as best we can to fit into, the modeling that we're doing.
Yeah, I try to be with things that are on a pipe, goggle valves or gate valves, that kind of thing. I try to be as close as I can to having it be prototype, because they're on a known, you're on a piece of tubing.
Right.
The tubing is a 1/2 inch. It's a 48-inch pipe. You don't want something that looks ginormous or too small on the pipe, because that's easy to see with the modeler's eye, right? Other things that I have not been able to do anything but scale a photo, and I may not have a dead-on photo, But I know that the thing just has to be close,
Right.
uh, because there really is nothing to compare it against. I mean, if you got a locomotive, you can go, look at a print and say, oh, the locomotive is supposed to be 110 feet long, and this model is wrong because it's 112 feet long or something like that.
Right.
But to me, I feel like it's more important to be really close and give the modeler the ability to have the piece that looks nice and probably saves them a ton of time and whatever they're trying to build, um, than it is to like spend a year trying to find a print to draw something that's um, you're unable to scale it to the exact down to the half a foot or something like that. And I'm pretty open about that. I get stuff as very close as I possibly can, and I think a lot of times, I mean, I had a guy look at my Benzol plant one time at a train show. I had it on display, and he said, "That's a Benzol plant." I said, "Yeah, how do you know that?" He goes, "Well, I used to work on those and back in the '60s, and I thought that was pretty cool because the one I
That's
had modeled was from the '50s." And
that's a that's a great compliment.
yeah, I mean, he stood there and looked at it, and he said, I said, the biggest thing I was worried about was did I get all this stuff the right size? And he stood there looking at it for a few minutes, and I don't know whether he was just looking at it or if he was looking at the doors and the hand railings for height comparison or something like that. But he said, yeah, it looks like it's all the right sizes to me. The pipes look like the right size. So, because he was a modeler too, so I mean,
Right.
it was pretty good to hear that. I didn't want him to say it was prototype. I just wanted him to say it looked about the right size. So.
Do the steel mill guys really get into the, we'll just call them rivet counters when it comes to that kind of stuff, or are they fairly loose on the structure side of it, because you do have to compress things quite a bit just because of the
Um,
sheer scale of steel mills.
I think for the size of the blast furnaces they do, the Walther's blast furnace kit is really all over the place because the stoves are at best they're late 3-pass stoves or 4-pass stoves. Um, and late meaning like in the 70s.
Right.
And the furnace column itself is only like 100-ton furnace column, and that's from like 1900. And the the things in it just don't match. And um, that was a big heartache for the steel mill guys for a long time. Was they one of the things that you won't find with steel mill modelers is somebody that does want to compress something. They want it to be massive, and
Right.
so it's been a giant sore spot for years that the HO scale blast furnace column is actually better on an N scale blast furnace model because on an N scale model it would be more something like a 1950s or 1960s blast furnace.
Okay.
And the top works for 1900s, the top works is all completely wrong, and it's a very modern top works on it. So that's one of the reasons that I'm coming out with the furnace number 7, because it was built in 19 I think 54 or 56. It was the largest furnace in the world, I think, at the time it was built, and it's more of a modern tonnage furnace. Um, Next time we talk, I'll have a Walther's furnace column sitting next to it. I'll bring them closer so that people can see the difference in size.
Okay.
But fortunately, the base of it, you have to modify the roof a little bit, but the hearth is kind of the same size. It's a little bigger, but you can still put it in the Walther's kit, so you could still use the cast house floor and all that. And I made the top of it, the top of the furnace rather, and the off takes. They will accommodate the Walther's pieces to make the top works. So you can really just kind of swap out. You can even use the bustle pipe. You can kind of swap out the column and put the platforms on it, and use your top works and make more of a 60s 70s era blast furnace, and it's significantly larger. I don't know how that is. That true? I mean, do you find that you look for things that are are more from the 50s or the 60s, or are you just doing modern
Yeah.
stuff or whatever you can come by, or what?
Well, most of what I'm finding right now is clearly the modern stuff is easy to come by online, but there's a lot of stuff from the 50s and the 60s, which is great because I love the transition era to begin with. Um, so the images go back to the 50s and 60s, and a lot of those pieces haven't changed their design. They've changed their sizes, and they've, in the case of distillation columns, they're adding extra sections every time they figure out what they can refine and kick through the process down the line somewhere for a different fuel type, and then they'll reheat it and bring it back. So we just have new technology that allows those things to expand, but they're just, I haven't found, like I said, the kit that Walters does, it's so small, and I looked at it and I was like, this just isn't, it's not going to work for me. And that's why I kind of, the custom route.
So like the devices that are in it, the different, I don't know what to call them, the different things that are in it are too small, or the kit itself is too small?
The kit itself, in my opinion, is too small. It's for a small refinery. Basically, it's the smallest refinery that you could really do. That if you really wanted to model the large modern refineries of today, you would need like 5-6 of those kits just to start getting a semblance of all the different processes that are involved. And that's the hurdle.
I meant like I think it's called a distillation column. Is that like physically too small for that kit? Like it really ought to belong in an N scale kit, or it's
about halfway in between.
Oh,
it would be too big for an N scale kit, but they're not really quite big enough for HO scale. Now, having said that, there are smaller refineries that use smaller distillation columns. That's the great thing, is that there are tons of sizes, but it's what I would consider on the smaller side. I think in the kit, I don't have one with me. I think the column size is 1.5 inches in diameter, and the ones that I do are closer to 2.25. Just because they're bigger and taller and it's the correct scale. And I wasn't worried about trying to, shorten a model to fit, underneath a 12-inch shelf or an 18-inch shelf. I mean, the columns in my refinery are going to be pushing 2 feet. So, because that's the look I wanted to go for, is like the steel mill side, I want them to be big and massive and just pipes everywhere.
Yeah, guys don't realize that, one of the things that has been a sore spot with the steel mill guys is that the exhaust stack for the coke works is not tall enough. Those stacks were on average about 300 feet tall.
Yeah, they're huge.
And the problem with a lot of them was they were brick. So making one out of brick is out of brick sheet is almost an impossibility because it's a tapered column.
Right.
And you would end up with, your lines on your mortar lines would be completely wrong. And in the back, it would, they'd dive together like a chevron. And this guy in Europe, I think in Germany, he actually carved one and then made a mold from it. And they were like, I think they were like 30 inches or something.
Yeah.
And he did offer to make them for other guys, but I never got one. I never put an order in for one. And but that's a big problem with us, is that if you want to now of course you could always do a brick if you did like a square stack, which I don't know that I've ever really seen a square stack that tall. But you could make a really tall square stack for that purpose, but a lot of the stuff just isn't tall enough, and I know why they did that, because they were wanting to sell it to people, and it's a cost prohibitive thing to make things crazy tall.
But the kits are all pieced together anyway. I mean, I can't imagine it would be that much more difficult to throw in an extra 8 or 10-inch section of plastic tube.
Well, the thing is the brick smokestacks that are out there are usually 2 pieces.
Okay.
Probably because of the way they injection mold them.
Right.
So they're like a clamshell affair. And, they could, it seems to me like someone could make a fairly tall stack and make it in 12-inch sections or something like that. And but I don't know how much all those, the die casting and I don't know how much all that stuff, the molds. I mean, I don't know how much all that takes to make, how much money it is, but it's probably crazy expensive for the amount of chimneys you'd sell. I may just do a steel chimney on mine at the club, just because that way I could get a 24-inch chimney and I put some guy wires on it or something, and it just is what it is,
Yeah.
But the steel mill guys, typically they want the things to be massive because it's impressive. I mean, that's what attracts me to it. They're massive models, just like their real equipment is massive. And I would assume that's true of the refinery guys too. If you're going to build one, you want it to be huge and have people go, "Holy crap, look at that!"
Yeah, because it's a great eye-catching piece. That's why I love of Ulrich's model that he's been working on for years. He's done a great job with continuing to expand each part of his refinery. As he gets done with one project, he is right immediately into the next one. But yeah, it's one of those that the more you can cram into a space, the better it looks. There's something about that industrial technology that's exciting. It's like watching the big boy roll down the main line, today that, a lot of us haven't seen for years. I love that they're restoring those locomotives because it's just cool.
Do you find that there are things in the refinery where there is a version of a particular device that has less footprint, meaning it might be vertical instead of horizontal or something like that? I mean, are there that kind of devices within the refinery where it'd be better for you for a space, from a space context on a guy's layout to make a vertical device rather than one that's horizontal that may even be more common? Or
yeah, and the beautiful thing with refinery layout is they're kind of like any real estate. They work within the footprint that they have. And so while there are great organizational tools for, where your direct fire heater might be next to your crude oil tanks, the reality of it is as modelers, we can't separate our crude oil storage tanks, 12 feet away like they might be in a, regular refinery. They're going to get stacked right next to the heater and the distillation column and the chemical storage tanks and the post-fuel storage tanks. All that can be arranged randomly. So the horizontal aspect it really can be mitigated by doing vertical options for heaters and storage solutions. They have both. That's the great thing with refineries, is that you can find examples of both because they've been done specifically to work within real estate they have. Mm-hmm. So a modeler can approach things from the same standpoint in that, hey, if I want to model a refinery, it doesn't have to be modeled after, a specific refinery in a specific location. The examples are just plentiful of small refineries that are built right along the tracks in just random configurations. It's like, okay, we're going to add, 4 storage tanks this year, and they drop them on the tank, and then they figure out the piping to configure through it and get it over to the, the receiving and delivery platforms. And it's all piping. So the piping becomes the horizontal component to your models and getting it from one location to the next. You can drop any of those vertical elements anywhere. It's not nearly as I think constraining as steel mills are. I mean, you can't have your hot blast stoves, 10 feet away in HO scale across the room from your blast furnace.
Oh no, yeah, they have to be. They're usually crazy close to the furnace. Yeah.
Yeah. So the refinery has some limitations, like with the case of the coke tower. There's a very direct relationship between the heaters associated with the pairs of coke drums from an efficiency standpoint in that process. But the others are a little bit more flexible in that once they run those lines, they can take them to wherever they need to, 100 feet, 200 feet, 300 feet away. And they add a pump at every so many intervals to keep the pressure up to get it to the direction it needs to go. So
Yeah, see, I find that guys, I watch the conversations on, although I haven't been lately, just because it's summer probably. I don't not sure how the other guys that are listening are, but I do more of my modeling in months than I do in the summer. At summertime, I'm outside a lot.
right.
But I watch the conversations on Stuma modeling on Facebook, and um, there are things that guys I don't think realize within a steel mill. They want to do a blast furnace, and then they want to do the blowing engine house, and they put the blowing engine house literally right next to the blast furnace. And although I'm sure that's true of some plants, oftentimes it wasn't.
Right.
It's providing cold blast air, so it really almost doesn't matter how far away. I mean, it does matter how far away it is because then you need more volume, but or then more wind, as they call it. But the part of the cool thing is, I see so many guys, they put those two plants on their layout, and the thing that they miss is the ability to put the piping in with the vents, the pipe vents, and the pipe bridges over, maybe a bridge over a road or something.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's all the interesting stuff, because you're giving something to look at. You're giving something to look at over here, blast furnace, and then they see this other building, but there's pipes connecting the two, and they're like 3 feet apart. And
Well, and
to me, that's interesting modeling too.
well, and if I approach things purely from a designer's, as an architect, we like to do things that lead your eye through a space. And modeling really should be the same way. And so, with a case like that, I mean, that's the cool stuff. That's what gets you to look at what's coming from, those independent masonry structures across tracks or across roads to get to the blast furnace. I mean, if it's the blower house, put it on the other side of the tracks and create that scenery option, because it draws your eye through the scene. And those are the things that I love when we get into the details of the 3D printing. It's like your gate valves. Your eyes fall on the pipe, and then you see the detail.
Yep.
And then your eye expects to see the detail again, 6 inches, 8 inches, 12 inches down the layout with another 3D printed part. And you can do a lot of the in between with no bells and whistles.
Right.
And that's what I love about the 3D piece for us, is that we do have that opportunity to, in a lot of cases, create relatively cost-effective solutions for modelers that are interested in the detail. But in some cases, like your precipitator, is that what it's called?
Yeah, electrostatic precipitator.
Yeah. I mean, that's a big piece. There's a lot of time in it for modeling. It takes a while to print, and it's a more expensive piece. But at the same time, some guys don't want to model it. In the sense, they don't want to scratch build it. They want the model, and they'll drop the money to buy the model because this is what they do. This is their discretionary income.
Yeah, so I feel like the precipitator, because the precipitator, the cool thing about it is too, like, I'm going to use one of these in my Coke plant, because there is one in the Coke plant. There's actually
Right.
at Thomas, there were 2 of them, and they weren't very big, so I'm going to use one and make it larger. But it's just an interesting looking thing, and you don't have to use it just in a steel mill. Like, this one that I'm putting together now, it's my prototype for putting in the catalog, but I'm also going to use it in the gas works,
Right.
the coal gas works at the club, because they had one it might be a little large, but it's cool to look at. And, I don't know that people will identify it with what they see over in the Coke batteries or in the steel mill when I get going on that. But I think the reason I asked about the vertical component is that I try to think about things that people are going to put in the mill. Steel mill is always worried about their footprint, right? Because they only had just so much property.
Right.
And that sounds crazy to say that when you can drive by a steel mill for like 2 miles,
Yeah.
but they really did, because typically that property was surrounded by other industries. Usually on one side there would be a river, because they used a crazy amount of water.
Right.
And you know, it might be a navigable river too, because back in the day they might be shipping raw materials in and finished product out on the river as well. And so you'll see things in the mill that they built to fit the footprint rather than what the device did. You know, they couldn't just buy a quote unquote off the shelf thing and put it there because it didn't fit. So they would design something that would. And um, you know, one of the things I always kind of take that in consideration, because modelers have the same problem, right? They only have so much footprint. So can I find a similar device that takes up less footprint but looks like it belongs, and it's actually the correct device too? It's the correct machine or plant or whatever you want to call it.
Well, yeah, and we're all limited on space at some point, whether that's a a full blown 20 by 30 shed, or it's a 10 foot by 11 foot extra bedroom that you're putting your layout in. So yeah, your real estate becomes important when making those decisions. Even as part of the research and development side, and that's where how one of the questions I always ask myself is, how much do you really want to model? What do you really want to get after when you're developing these models, so that I'm thinking about it on the module or the layout with the space I've got. How can I squeeze a building in? How can I squeeze, more pipes in? Because that's, to me, the big piece. And how much time do I want to spend modeling something that's a detail? And so that's a question that I've got. How much time do you generally dedicate to a model? Do you limit yourself? Or I don't. If I want to model something, I just say it'll take me as long as it takes. Some models take an hour. Some models take 80 hours, 100 hours, depending on the level of detail and how many parts I'm breaking something into, for me to effectively and consistently 3D print it with success. Do you limit your hours on design?
Oh, on a 3D model. I probably work on the stuff too much, but you can tell I try to hit all of the things I know are going to be visible in HO scale. Believe it or not, I don't worry too much about the N scale, because I know what is going to be is printable, and that's why I don't offer everything in N scale, because there are some
Right.
things that just aren't going to translate into N scale, or I'd have to make them so where it would just be, a blob or whatever you want to call it, and it's not really
A
going to be a
blob.
detailed piece. Yeah. So I'm actually really hoping the S scale stuff takes off, because HO and S, the cost of the components is relatively close. O scale gets kind of crazy, and I actually stay away from O scale, because I would, the person that I am, I would want to add a lot more detail to an O scale version of something I sell in HO.
Oh, yeah.
Because there would be a crazy amount more detail that you could see, especially in a printed part. So I don't want something that looks, no offense to Lionel, but I don't want something that looks like a Lionel part in O that looks really nice in HO, because it's lacking more of the detail. I mean, if you got a magnifying glass out and looked at my bolts, you can see they're a hex head bolt.
Yeah.
In HO. In O, the person that I am, I would probably actually want to put, like whether it was a grade 8 or a grade 5 on the head of the bolt and stuff, because this stuff would print.
And you're going to bevel the edges.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So, as far as like actually building models, I'm like one of those insane people that has to, like, at some point in time, I have to say, okay, that's enough. That's enough detail. The only person that's ever going to see this is going to be, that's going to come in and look at this model and see all this extra detail is Jason's.
Yeah, and I'm looking for it.
and some of the other, like, steel mill guys that I know are detail hounds like I am. For the casual modeler that just, or the visitor to our train club that comes by, they're going to look at it and just be amazed that it's there in the first place, you know?
Yeah.
Um, so I actually have to stop myself on that kind of modeling. It's funny that you asked that question because I actually don't have the same approach when I'm doing a 3D model. I draw up all the things that I know are going to be visible in HO, and I draw them at a level of detail that I know will look really nice in HO, and look super detailed. But then I stop. You know, there's things I know just aren't going to print,
Right.
um, or just aren't going to translate well, so I just leave them off.
And I take the same approach. That's why I was having a conversation with a guy today based on how I do my nuts and bolts and modeling. And he messaged me directly after I had posted a video saying, there's a lot faster ways to do the way you model it. And I said, I'm sure there are. I said, but I'm approaching things with the software that I use specifically for HO scale, and the tools that I use within that software are applicable to other things that I model. So I'm actually taking advantage of one particular tool to do 5, 6, 7 different types of 3D modeling so that I develop the efficiency of using that tool within the software. And he goes, well, yeah, but you're wasting time. I'm like, define wasting time. It takes me 30 seconds. It's not like it was a labor intensive process. I could save 10 seconds. I said, I'm embellishing and enhancing my skill set to do things at a detail level I know will print well, but might, like you said, might not have all the little bitty details that just aren't going to print. Because I think we can get pretty close, and you gotta realize at some point we have to stop and look at what does the eye actually perceive in our models, not what's the scale of real world stuff.
Right. Townie72 says hard to get love for N scale.
Ouch.
Actually, it's not hard to get love for N scale, but you should understand that, like, my burners, the Kinney burners that I sell, the on the top of the gate valve that's in the burner, they have a valve so you can shut the burner off. The burner actually goes in and out of the stove mechanically. And after it's pulled back out of the stove, there's a gate valve that shuts off on it to shut the burner itself off for when they do the blow. And the mast, there's like a mast guide that goes, I'm probably calling it the wrong thing. Some steel mill guy will get on here and say that's not called that, but it's got like a mast off the top of it that's a guide for the rod that actually raises and lowers the blade, the window that's in the valve.
Is it like a damper?
No, it's not used as a damper. It actually shuts off the burner from the stove.
Okay.
It mechanically closes it off.
Okay.
So at the top of those, there's an electric motor and a hand wheel, and that's what actually raises and lowers that valve blade itself, right?
Okay.
And in HO scale, that guide, that little mast thing that's the guide. The mast is only like I think it's like 40 or 50,000 square. So if I halved that, there wouldn't be anything to print.
Yeah, there's nothing to print.
And then there's no electric motor on the top where it's supposed to be. Now, if I just got rid of that detail altogether, I could totally print those burners in N scale.
Yeah.
But I've chosen not to print them in N scale because it's a detail that's pretty significant on the burner. Now, the burner itself would still look the same, and I guess you could just put a brass rod on there and call it a day, but you just can't get that small. I mean, it would translate down to I want to say that would translate down to something like an 18,000 square or something like that. It just wouldn't print. On the other side of that, I am going to produce N-scale blast furnace equipment, and I already do print the stove bodies and stuff like that. So you guys haven't been able to get blast furnace stoves forever, or blast furnaces, I should say, forever, because the only run I know of in N scale was the original run back in the 90s. So I'm going to produce furnace columns and stoves, and I could produce this electrostatic precipitator and the gas washer and stuff in N also. I don't think it would quite have the same level of detail on it, but I could.
Well,
And
but I think
you guys could build your own blast furnace then.
Yeah, I think that, and I'm not an N scale modeler, so I've seen plenty of N scale layouts at shows and stuff, and I've seen some of the kits, and there are a lot of people that actually are asking me, "Hey, when are you going to produce this in N scale on the refinery stuff?" Mm-hmm. And I kind of opposed it, I think, for a while because my brain's thinking detail. And I know I lose the detail, but then I came to the realization, I said, these are all big pieces. The only detail I realistically lose that I'm obsessed with are these silly little nut and bolt things that make a model when you paint them and dry brush them and, rust them up. And I mean, you can see that stuff in HO scale. Like you said, you don't even need a microscope sometimes. You'll see it if it's painted well. N scale, the nuts and bolts kind of disappear. And I finally realized that that's probably okay because they don't have a whole lot of nuts and bolts type details in N scale now.
No, and I just so he knows, I do produce a ton of things in N. I make these. This is actually a basic oxygen furnace slag pot in N. And just for size reference, this thing is gigantic in HO. This is an HO scale slag pot that's just for a regular blast furnace. So these are a lot smaller. I don't have an HO scale version of this printed right now, but I make this kind of stuff, and there just isn't that kind of thing. You can see the light casting through it, so it's not like it's a crazy thick model that's going to look crappy on your layout.
Right.
It's pretty thin wall. I want to say this is 25 thousandths wall, and so I do make quite a few things in N. It's just that I have to be careful because I don't want to promise something I can't deliver to you.
Yeah, and I'm from a details perspective, I would be the same way. And I probably just need to print a couple pieces of the HO scale model, scale them down to N without doing anything and see how they print. Mm. And then that way I could start responding to some of these guys that are asking for the N scale stuff. I just hate committing to something that I'm not actively familiar with on the scale side.
Well, you have to know that it's going to work on the printer.
Right.
I mean, before I offer anything in N scale, I make sure that I know it's, I'll print a prototype out, and I might have to go back and play with the wall thicknesses or thicken something.
It's like you're reading my mind, Kevin. That's the next question. I was going to ask you, how much prototyping do you really do? I mean, because some models for me, they're perfect the first time. I was like, well, it'd be nice if they could all be this way. But then there are some models where I'm constantly tweaking and prototyping, 5, 6, 7, 8 versions before I get to the one where I'm like, yeah, this is it. My tabs work perfect. The alignment works perfect. The details are printing well. How many are your models the same way?
Well, some of the things like how things fit together, you got to remember I've been doing, and I'm not trying to brag in any way. I've been doing this for 4 years now. And
you started in resin.
Yeah, I've only ever pretty much printed in with a Form 2. So I kind of learned all that stuff along the way. And now when I draw something up, if it has to fit together, I know how much allowance it needs to make sure that the tabs will fit together. And I know where I'm going to have problems with the residual resin staying, even though I've washed it really well in the IPA.
Don't share any of those secrets because we want people to stick around for episode 10.
So that's all kind of lessons learned stuff.
Right.
And supports. It's all really just time in the saddle with your printer. Um, so and other things I have printed out prototypes like this electrostatic precipitator that I'm working on now. This is the prototype. But typically what I try to do with a prototype is especially if it's something that I'm working on at the club, the prototype ends up just being mine and I use the club.
Right.
This one, for instance, you probably can't see it, but there are. Oh yeah, you can.
Yeah, you can see them.
Right up here, there are little holes in the platform. There should only be 2, and there's 5, and so on the production model, it doesn't have 5; it has 2 in that upper platform. But so I mean, and then if it's something that I've a requested part that I've drawn up, I usually just sell the prototypes off. I put them on the Facebook group for crazy low money, and I just I'm honest, they're prototypes or they're seconds,
right?
And somebody out there needs them. Every once in a while I get pipe elbows that the bottom will have a slash mark in it, or a score or something like that, and I just toss them into a pile and I harden them anyway. But eventually I just put them on there because they're still good. You just have to have that side facing down or against a wall or something.
Well, yeah, and the reality is with prints that aren't perfect, we call them seconds. There's generally stuff like elbow fittings that can be hidden within a model,
exactly. But they can be hidden.
Yeah, if you peek around the corner,
super low money because I'm Scottish and I can't throw them away.
Yeah.
And I know there's somebody out there that maybe needs something for that particular place in their layout, or maybe they can't swing with the other stuff really, the cost of it. So it's I can't throw the stuff out, so I just sell it for crazy cheap later. So now everybody that's listening will be waiting for prototype sales.
Yeah, that's part of the hurdle that we run into. I think I'm the same way though. I mean, I've just finally started throwing some stuff away. I'm like, yeah, I wouldn't even want somebody to really buy this. This was just a bad print.
I tossed something today, and I was like, there's got to be a way I can use this somewhere else. And I was like, just throw it out. Throw it away. So I threw it away.
Yeah, my problem is I keep saying that they all belong in the junkyard that I'm eventually going to build, but I'm probably never going to get to the junkyard. Hey, let me ask you something. You've been printing in resin for 4 years. You've learned a lot through the research and development with just printing. Just take the steel mills out of it, the refinery out of it, purely, learning through the process. What's one thing that you wished you had known when you started 3D printing that you've learned through the process and today? That if you had known something, that this would have been a game changer on day one, what would that be?
Probably wall thickness. I used to make the stuff I sold like crazy thick because I thought it had to be.
Right.
And at some point in time, I made something and it had a thin part on it. I guess it was probably like anything else that inventors are always discovering, it's by accident. I made something and the wall thickness on it was crazy thin, and I'm like, wow, that came out really nice. And I do know that when I started doing my pipe, when I was printing prototypes for the pipes, the pipe fittings, I decided to continually reduce the wall thickness until I had one fail.
Mm-hmm.
And
I did that with barrels.
Yeah, so I got pretty thin. I mean, I can print down. I can comfortably and reliably print down to 25,000.
What's the millimeter conversion? I have to do this so that when you say these thousands, I know what it equates to.
We didn't go to the moon on metric system. I'm just saying.
I know we didn't, and I'm not even a metric guy, but I just learned to model that way. 0.3.
Let me do the math for you really quick.
It's probably 0.3 millimeters.
Oh, hold on. 0.6.
Oh, you can print thinner than that. Well, maybe not wall thickness, depending on what you're printing. Yeah, I think
Yeah.
0.5 is generally the minimum they recommend on. I think that was put out by 3D Hubs or somebody on the minimum wall thickness. But yeah, part of that will all depend on what kind of cross support you might have against those walls to support it. If it's just purely a thin wall, 0.6 probably is as thin as you go.
So you said 0.5?
Yeah, 0.5 is the industry standard for minimum wall thickness.
Yeah, so I'd like to see that on some of the things that I've drawn up and printed. Because
Yeah.
I don't think it would work. I think depending on how you printed it and how you supported it, maybe.
Yeah.
But the problem is you've got a contact point at the support. You've got the printer. Now I don't know how your printer works. My printer moves the resin tray in order to separate it like moves it and then rolls off of it, right?
Okay.
Off of the part. And although I could print things that thin, again, it's not reliable.
Correct. I agree with that.
It's not reliable to do that. Now, if I had something like, on this model, if I wanted to print like the very top of it in that thin, I probably could get it to do it. But like these platforms are like, I made them like 40 thousandths thick. And I did that because post cure, you can see that they're dead flat.
Right.
They're not warped. I mean, you can look right across that platform and it's flat.
Yeah, so 40 thousandths is probably a millimeter.
40 thousandths would be.
You said 25 thousandths was 0.6.
Yeah.
So about a millimeter. And I agree. That's spot on. I'll pull the top off so if I can get this. I don't know if I'll.
It's a millimeter. Yeah, it's a millimeter.
Yeah, the top ledge of mine are at 0.8. Yeah. And those stick out off the cylinder 0.6 millimeters, and they're completely unsupported. I don't have to add supports to get that lip.
Yeah, see,
do that.
There's a balance between how thin can I make this, because I don't want to use, I want to save money and not use resin.
Right.
And in reality, print time, versus making it a reliable print that is repeatable, where I know that I can load it on the printer and go to bed, or load it on the printer and go to work and come home and the part will be there.
Right.
Because, I'm kind of notorious for taking a long time for getting people things, getting their orders to them.
Things take a while to print.
Well, that's going to go away.
Let me rephrase that. By the time you add post-processing to the entire start print to when it's ready to go out the door, I always tell people it's not going to happen in less than 4 days if it's coming from me. Right. If I have to print it, it's at least 4 days, because I let my prints sit and cure 24 hours minimum, or sit and dry 24 hours minimum before I remove supports or do any post-processing with curing.
Well, if I have, like, 2 weeks ago, I had 12 orders on deck. One of the orders, the guy has ordered, I think he ordered 4 Bessemer converters and 4 of something else that eludes me. And when his time is up, I'm gonna start printing his order tomorrow.
Right.
The Bessemer converters take a day, meaning like 22 hours to print, and he ordered 4 of them.
Whew.
And the other things he ordered, I think he ordered 4 of those too, and I think those take like 16 hours a piece to print.
Right.
So that one guy is going to occupy my printer for 8 days.
You need another printer.
I do. But the minute I buy another printer, the orders will go down to like 3 orders, and I won't have that kind of lead time. So here's what I do.
Yes, that is true.
If a guy orders, like somebody orders a set of the Walther's replacement crane beams, they take about 12 or 13 hours to print. So here's
Right.
what I'll probably do. If someone was to order a set of those, and like if 2 or 3 orders after this guy's orders, somebody ordered a set of those, I would probably print 2 of his Bessemer converters and then run the crane beams and then go back to the Bessemer converters.
Okay.
Right? Because I think that's fair.
Yeah.
But if, like, I had a perfect storm a month ago, I had 3 orders in a row, and each of those orders was probably 6 or 7 days a piece to print.
Wow.
So moving on to the next guy's order didn't really work. I did slip a couple of people in when I could load, like, a couple of small things on the build platform that were only like 4 or 5 hours.
Right.
But, at the same time, then there's other times about 4 months ago, I had all these orders that were like, one guy wanted a ingot stripper and another guy wanted, I don't remember, a bunch of pipe fittings and stuff. And it was all these orders that were like 5 hours a piece and 8 hours a piece and stuff like that. So, there are times like right now, if you're going to order 1 or 2 items and they're not huge, then, your lead time is about 10 days.
Okay.
If everybody keeps doing that, then the lead time is going to stay right around a week to 10 days. But the minute somebody, as you get more things in your catalog and they're bigger things, or somebody says, hey, I'm building a giant refinery at my train club, and they order $1,000 worth of stuff.
I just had that happen.
Yeah, then the lead time for the guys ordering 1 or 2 onesie twosie items is going to go like crazy high, like a month. Like,
well,
I've had times where my lead time literally was 3 months because I had 24 orders deep, and my mother passed away. I didn't shut the website off, but I did put up a note, and I put one up on Facebook, and I was like, hey, my mom passed away.
Yeah.
And the lead times went out to like 3 months. And I was including like extra parts in guys' kits, and I was giving them a coupon off for the next order because I was very apologetic, but stuff like that happens. And
hey, family first, man, every time.
Yeah, right. And that's the other thing, we're coming into fall, which I would assume you'll have the same experience. The cold weather is starting. Guys are starting to, instead of going out on the boat or going to a baseball game, they're starting to go down to the basement.
Yeah, they're hitting the model room
again.
Yeah.
And they're like, oh, I better order some stuff. And, so your order load goes from maybe 8 or 9 orders to 20 orders in 2 weeks. And, it's just like that. In the summertime,
Right.
My orders generally drift down to, 8 to 12 orders or something like that. But in the wintertime, I always expect my order load to go right up into the 20s. And, if, like I said, if all of 20 of those guys have ordered onesie twosie items and I can put a couple orders on the build platform at once, fantastic. If not, and these printers aren't cheap, the new Form 3 is almost $4,000.
Right.
And I'm going to get one. But you just have to, and I'm going to keep the Form 2 running as long as I can, but Formlabs isn't going to support it anymore. And I could probably get aftermarket stuff. But the thing is, guys should also understand about a Form 2 is that if you don't have genuine Formlabs devices in it, it will print in what's called open format, which means it no longer heats up the resin because it has a resin heater in it, because the resin actually prints a lot better when it's warm.
Dude, those have a resin heater is it in the tray?
Yeah, I think it is in the tray.
Peopoly just came out with a heated resin tray, which makes me kick myself because I wish I bought the Peopoly Phenom a year ago instead of the Saturn.
Yeah,
because that's the one thing that when winter hits me here, I have to move all my printers in from the garage. Because right now, I'm in Kansas. For those of you that have no idea where I'm from, it's hot here in the summer, and so you're spot on. Resin sitting at 85 degrees prints beautifully.
Yeah, and mine prints at 35 degrees C, which I'm not really sure what that is in Fahrenheit. I have to do the conversion on it real quick.
That's going to be like
But
100 degrees.
yeah, it gets hot.
Yeah, I think the recommended temperature is 31 or 32 for most resins that are using what I call the cheap printers, which is what I have. Don't get me wrong. I've learned to work with what I have and
Yeah, that's
take
it's
advantage
95
of it.
degrees. It's
Yeah,
95 degrees. So I mean um when you go to open format, it doesn't do that anymore. It also doesn't sense how much resin is in the tray. Um, and it makes a big difference if the resin isn't. I tried it, and the print quality is not there.
correct.
So I would rather spend the cash and be able to provide a really good product than not have happen. And like I said, I can keep it running as long as they provide product, but they have said they're not going to support it after 2023.
Ah, what a
So
bummer.
so um, and it knows when stuff is done. When the resin tanks are empty, it has a reader on each of the resin cartridges,
Right.
and so you can't like fool it. And they've really done their job to get you to buy their stuff. But frankly, I don't mind buying their stuff because it's top quality.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, it's the best printer that you can get on what I'll call the hobby side of printers, because you have to take that next jump to $10,000-$15,000 printers, which are
Hmm.
entry level commercial machines.
Right.
As crazy as that sounds, but I mean, Forma is without a doubt probably the best resin printer on the market. Um, it's sitting at that top end.
It's
I
certainly
just,
the best for somebody that's a dummy and doesn't know how to do all the fix-it settings that are in the other kind of printers. So
or doesn't want to tinker with figuring all that out.
I'm not a tinkerer, man. I want to
Right.
just put it on the printer and be done with it. And
Yeah.
if a guy, the thing is I look at the price of it as if a guy's just loaded, he could just buy one.
Right.
If if he's not loaded but he wants the quality, he's really got to find somebody that has one that will print for him. And I do that. People send me stuff and I print it for them. I don't have a problem doing it. Um, and I don't put it in my catalog or anything like that.
Right.
Um, but uh, I kind of look at it as I wouldn't really have the printer either if I didn't have the business and be selling the parts. So it's kind of like a crowdsourced printer almost.
Yeah.
Um,
I get that.
I mean, I bought it. I knew how long it would. I knew if depending on how the sales were, I knew how long it would take to recoup the money from laying out the cash, and it's just worked like that.
One thing that you could consider, and it works for some people, might not be your thing, but you could actually think about doing a Kickstarter that put a model together that it's going to cost you X dollars to print the model, and there's a markup component for you, and when you reach $5,000 in supporters on your Kickstarter page, then your printer has been covered through the Kickstarter, but then on the backside you have to provide the models to these people that supported you.
Yeah, right.
It's one of those things that it takes a little work to put together, but I mean, they're not cheap printers, and knowing the quality of the work that you do might not be a bad way to approach funding the next level. And hey, I'm going to produce this particular piece or pieces for a kit as part of this Kickstarter. And oh, by the way, up front, you guys are helping me purchase the next best printer.
Well, I'd have to figure all that out.
You'd have to
Obviously,
do
we'd have to do the
math.
math. Um, I could buy the printer today if I really wanted. Um,
Right.
I'm just holding out because I don't like buying anything the year that it's released. The Form 3 has been out for a little over a year, I think.
Okay.
And I've been watching the Formlabs has a group on Facebook, and I've been watching the Facebook group, and people comment like, "Hey, I can't get my Form 3 to do this, or I can't get my Form 3 to do that, or why is it doing this, or why is it doing that?" So, I'm gonna wait probably until next spring or something like that before I buy one because Just because they put it on the market doesn't mean it works all the time, even for Form Labs, you
Right.
know? And I think mechanically the machine probably works fantastic. I think there, from what I've seen, there are bugs that they're working out in the software, and I just want to have them have that worked out. I mean, when I bought my Form 2, that's how it was. I called them and talked to them, and they assured me that it was bulletproof and that all the bugs had been worked out of it and all that. And when I got it, it did. It just functioned flawlessly. So, um, I think I'm just going to wait until the Form 3 is at that level for me. You know, when I stop seeing people commenting and it starts to become more, the comments are more someone that isn't used to 3D printing bought one and they thought it was going to be an easy bake oven.
Isn't that just about 90% of the modelers out there?
I don't know.
Everybody thinks you just
I do watch.
put something in it, push a button, and out kicks a 3D print.
I purposely stay off of some of those sites because I've seen some of the comments where I remember being that guy, but I don't like seeing the comments from some of the other people that are like, well, you're a dumbass.
Yeah.
You know?
Duh.
The guy probably realizes he's a dumbass. That's why he's on here asking a question. You could be a little nicer. And yeah, I could jump on there and be the nice guy, but at the same time, I'm just a drama. I have an allergy to drama, so I try to stay away from it. It's a big reason why I left a certain SIG in the NMRA. So I don't want any of that garbage anymore. So I'm at that point in my life. So
it's time to move on and just be happy modeling.
Yeah, right.
I hear you, man. Hey, I'm going to shift gears just a second here because it's a question that I wrote down that I don't have an answer to for me, but I'm going to put you on the spot. And you can do that with me with a question anytime you want. But is there a specific model, and we'll keep it to steel mills, that you have had on your radar that you really, really want to model, but it just hasn't crept up to the top of your list yet? But you're dying to model it.
Actually, I have one sitting next to me.
Really?
I just haven't released it yet because I haven't had time to build the whole thing yet.
Oh, cool. So you can't share it?
I can. Sure,
okay.
I can. So it's going to sound like we set each other up.
Uh-oh.
I sort of set you up, but not really. So I have this desire on our layout at the train club. There is our layout is so huge that it has this really cool quality about it. We have a lot of captive loads, and some of them originate at the mine or the quarry.
Okay.
Or the field, and they travel to several iterations of whatever that thing would become. Like grain, we have a lot of wheat fields on the layout, and then we have grain elevators, local grain elevators. We have a giant grain elevator, a bunch of flour mills, and then we even have a grocery distributor and bakeries and onto the passenger car servicing facility where they have the commissary for loading the dining cars, right?
Okay.
So we have the same thing with the mill in that we have coal, and that goes from the coal mine to the coke battery, and from the coke battery to the steel mill, and then the chemicals from the coke battery, the byproducts plant, they travel other places on the layout too. Some of them go to a tie plant we have that creosotes ties. So we have a lot of those cool things, and we have a limestone quarry on the layout, and of course it goes to the steel mill. Well, the thing that's not there is the limestone, the limestone kilns, the limestone plant.
Okay.
Take raw limestone and dry it, and then crush it to the appropriate size, and then it can go to the mill. It can also go to we've got a big cement plant on the layout, so it can go there. So if anybody's ever seen a big limestone plant, the rotary kilns that they use to dry the limestone are huge. They're not really big in diameter, but they're very long. And to
Okay.
model anything, you know, you look at the cement plant that Walder sells, their rotary kiln that's on in that kit is like 18 or 20 inches long. And you start getting into a footprint problem if you want to do a limestone plant, because like the Charmeuse limestone that's down here in Burns Harbor, or is it? It's either Burns Harbor or East Chicago. Um, they have 5, I think, rotary kilns, and the plant is massive because of it. But there is a type of limestone kiln that's made in Germany that's actually used all over the world. That's vertical, and so I did a bunch of research. I thought, wow, these are only used in Europe and they're used in England, but in fact they aren't. They're used here in the United States too. They just aren't as common as the long rotary kilns. So the base, I drew up the base of them. It's a 2-piece kit, right? And they fit together, they lock together. And
Yep.
then this is the base, so this down here would just go on styrene base. There's a little bit of finishing. These actually fit together really nicely, and then on top of it here, you use tubing, because the rest of it is pretty straight. I still have to do the top of it, and then there's actually 2 styles. There's one that's all open, where you can see all the platforms and stuff. And there's not a ton of platforms too. There's only like 3 platforms, I think. There's the ones that are on here, and then there's 2 more. And then there's another style that's got like a corrugated sheet shed over the top of it. So if you weren't looking to like put all those little platforms and the detail and stuff into the top of it, you could do the corrugated shed one, and it would be pretty easy to do because you're just building a big box out of, rectangular box out of corrugated sheet.
Right.
And the other thing too is what I showed you was how the kilns are built. They're in twins. And the biggest one I saw was 4 pairs. But you got to remember, these across, so across these platforms, I think is a little over 6 inches. So across the top of here is about 6.5 inches.
Okay.
And they ran them next to each other, but the one that's in England I'm going to model, the end pair is sideways. So
Oh, interesting.
you can do, I've got pictures of ones here in the United States that are just a pair, and I've got a picture of one that was 2 pair, but it's only 6 inches. So if you wanted to do 3 pair and make a pretty big limestone plant, that's still only like 18 or 20 inches.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not very big on your layout. And then you just need some aggregate silos, and they fed these things from a big bunker, similar like a Coke battery would have, with skip hoists like a steel mill blast furnace would have. And so you could actually compress all this pretty small. You could make the silo, or the bunker rather, you could make that a backdrop building and model the skip hoists and the kilns, and then just have, that's what I'm going to do, and then just have a aggregate bins where you'd load the hoppers up. So you could make a pretty good sized industry in a very small area and still have room for 3 or 4 tracks for like loads in, loads out, with like 6 hoppers on each track or something like that.
Yeah, so you've taken the one thing you've really wanted to model and actually done it recently.
I drew up the base. I actually drew up that base like probably almost 2 years ago.
Yeah.
I just haven't. I drew it up because I wanted to see how it would print and how I could do it, how it would come out, how it would fit on the layout, that kind of stuff before I let it go to the public. Because I need to draw up there's a thing on top that looks a little bit like a boiler, and I want to draw that up because I want to be able to provide it in the kit. But the cool thing is the platform, the when you go from one size tubing to the next, it's literally a flat platform that go in between them. There's no taper in the column or anything like that.
Oh, okay.
So stacking everything would be very easy also,
Yeah.
because you just you cut out a platform that's a round disc, and glue it to the top of the tubing and glue the next piece of tubing on top of it. So it's a
Right.
pretty interesting looking model. I have um, much like you, I have like 100 things I want to draw up. So
Yeah, and I
I would,
asked that, and I was like, I don't have one, but now that I'm thinking about it, I started the Pensy Roundhouse in Blairsville, Pennsylvania. I started this project 3 years ago,
mm,
and my goal when I started was I'm going to print this entire thing in filament because I didn't have resin printers yet. I started before I had resin, and all my columns are done, all of my roof trusses and everything are done. And then I bought the resin printers, and I'm like, oh shoot, now I can do louvers and I can do all these pieces that are going to look so
right.
much better. So it's
Right.
literally been sitting. I've got you can see the tray behind me.
Yeah.
That's a baker's tray, and it's loaded with all my parts from different models that I'm working on in various stages.
Oh,
There's 2 full trays of columns and roof pieces printed in filament, half of which have been sanded and are ready for paint, and the other half need to be processed. And I was like, it's been sitting like that for over a year and a half, 2 years now, because I was like, I can't not do resin for some of the details. So now that I think about it, that is my project, but it's huge. It's an 8-stall roundhouse, and it's 24 by 30 inches.
oh wow.
And so it's 120 foot deep. So it's a pretty good sized roundhouse. And the great thing is I have just a crazy amount of photos that I've been able to acquire for it. So I've got some great detail to do it right.
Mm.
But yeah, as I'm thinking about it, that one's not going to be one that I can really do for the public. I mean, my print time on that already is well over 200 hours in just filament parts.
Mm.
And I'm like, I can't take 2 months to print something for some. I guess I could, but then I only have one filament printer, so I'm stuck like you in a backlog. And right now, my Coke Tower bases are all filament because they're 4-inch by 17 long by 5 tall, and they work great on the filament printer because they're concrete.
Right.
And I've got 2 orders for that. They take a week a piece if I'm printing basically 16 hours a day.
Yeah, I haven't printed one of the cast house floors yet, but I have a feeling the cast house floor, the printer will probably be running for 17 hours or something like that to print
Yeah.
one. I mean, if you've ever seen one, even for the model, the Walters model, they're not really complicated. It's just the volume of ABS that I'll be printing. You know, it's a
Right.
lot because it's such a big piece and it can't be thin.
Right.
It really shouldn't be thin because it has to be, you know, it's the basis for the cast house.
Now, does each on that topic, does each steel mill have? Are there plans for the casting floor? I don't know that I've ever seen like a floor plan for a steel mill. Now that I think about it, other
Yeah,
than like the blast furnace area.
yeah. I mean, the two that I'm going to do, I could do three. The two that I'm going to do are Furnace E from Sparrows Point. I'm going to do a reverse of the Walters kit so that if you want to run two blast furnaces together, you can, and you'll have common tracks.
Right.
Or, um, or if you want to, it just works better on your layout to have cast house floor reversed
Okay.
for the footprint you're working in. And then there's another, and I can't remember which furnace it is, but there's a furnace at Sparrows Point that was unbelievably massive. I mean, in HO scale, I won't be able to print the cast house floor in one piece because in HO scale, it's like 30 inches long.
Oh my goodness. Okay.
Yeah, it's gigantic. I have to print the furnace column in like two pieces too because it's so huge. Um, but I thought no one would say I want to model that, but somebody said that they wanted to model. I mean, you'd have to have a giant layout to do. I mean, if it's 30 inches long, realistically for the switch leads coming into the cast house floor, I mean, you'd probably need another 4 feet just for all that to happen. So I mean, it's a
Yeah.
4 by 8 sheet of plywood all by itself just to do this furnace. But some guy said he wanted one if I ever did it. So I don't know if he'll still be around when I draw it up. But it's not super high on my priority list because of how giant it is. I think the consumer public would be pretty small on that one.
Yeah.
maybe an N scale it would be. Maybe it'd be better to do it in N scale and sell it that way, because in N scale wouldn't be quite as massive, but it would look massive on an N scale layout.
That's awesome. That's big though.
Yep.
So
well, what do you think?
We're an hour and a half. I think we've covered quite a bit of stuff tonight. We can obviously keep going on. It's one of the things that I think an hour and a half probably works well for what we cover regularly if we switch up topics. Mm-hmm. So I think we probably should sign off instead of just keep rolling along, and we can try and formulate some more content for the next stream in 2 weeks. For those that have stuck around, I noticed we've had 3 or 4 viewers through the entire time, so I don't know if it's the same 3 or 4 or if they're coming and going, but I just greatly appreciate those of you that have hung around and jumped on in the comments. Hopefully our audio again was better. We'll check it tonight just to make sure as we keep plowing forward. Kevin and I have just a lot of content that we can cover on the model side. Both of our links are in the description in the video, so you can hit either one of our websites where our online stuff is for sale. I believe if I don't have the links in there already, I'll get the links into the Facebook sites as well. So with that said, Kevin?
All right, man. Thanks for hanging out, guys, and listening to us ramble for an hour and a half. If you've got any things you'd like us to talk about in the future, or comments on the show, you can always post that in the comments on the YouTube, and we'll take a look at it. And we'll just try to keep improving the show and generating interest. And totally appreciate you guys hanging out.
Good stuff. All right. Thanks again for your time tonight.